Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories, along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have an incredible guest with us. Her name is Brooke Bownes. She is an accredited trauma coach, therapist, and global #1 best-selling author. She works with ambitious women who struggle with feeling stuck and have blocks that are holding them back to help them reclaim their power and confidence by releasing limiting beliefs. She grew up having an abusive relationship with a narcissistic mother and then moved on to have two abusive relationships. She went through being homeless at one point and raised four children single handedly. She has a unique way of understanding people where they're at and helping them find their power. She now lives in a beautiful home with her husband and runs a successful business while having fun adventures with their camper van. I'm really excited to talk with Brooke today because she and I have some commonalities and experiences of life, and she's got a great perspective on helping you move through places where you may feel stuck in life. And so, without further ado, Brooke, I want to introduce you onto the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. And I'm really glad we get to connect and do this because I remember just how powerful your story was when you and I first met. And I'm going to leave that for you to share with listeners here in a second. But my heart went out to you in a lot of ways, but I also saw this person who went through a lot of struggles and a lot of trials very early on in life and became such an empowerment person for women to reclaim their power that was taken away and really create a beautiful life. And so I wanted to start the podcast with you sharing with us just a little bit about your journey through life.
Okay. Well, like you said, I'm now a successful business owner, best-selling author, coach, therapist, and speaker. But it didn't start out that way. I had a very traumatic life from early childhood. Actually, entering in the world was quite traumatic because I actually had the cord wrapped around my neck, and doctors told my parents that because of the issues I had with the cord around my neck, that I would probably never walk, and if I did, I would never run or ride a bike. Well, obviously, I didn't get the memo about not walking, and I did walk slightly later than most kids, but I did get the hang of it eventually. And when we went back into the hospital, the doctors were absolutely amazed, bearing in mind this is back in the early 70s. And they just said, that's great that she's learnt to walk, but she'll never ride a bike and she'll never be able to run. Because when the cord got wrapped around my neck, it caused issues on my right side, which was a whole lot weaker than my left. So they said I'd never be able to actually hold the handlebar and push the pedals with my right side. And if I tried to run, I would lose my balance and just fall over. Well, me being the little child I was and trying to make sense of the world at that time, my mother had been constantly saying to me, as you mentioned in the beginning, that she was a narcissist, and she's always used to say to me, "Why couldn't you just be normal like all the other kids? I wish you'd have died at birth. You're never going to amount to anything. Nobody's ever going to love you because you're just, you're not a normal child." And I looked around at all the other kids and they were all riding their bikes. So I thought, well, maybe if I learn to ride my bike, I'll be normal and my mum will love me. In my little, 4 or 5 year old mind, that's how I was like kind of thinking. So when the doctor said I'd never learn to ride a bike, I just remember saying to him, I will, and I'll come back and show you I can ride my bike. And my dad was like cheering, going, yeah, yeah, we'll get this sorted, don't worry. And my mother just shot me a look, and I realized I was then in trouble. And when we got in the car, it was dead silence. And I thought, I'm really in trouble now because I'd already realized that when she goes really quiet, I'm in trouble. So when we got home, my dad went off to work as a farmer, and she just sent me into my room and said, "Go get changed." And I thought, okay, that tone doesn't sound very good. I'm just going to go and do as I'm told. And when I came out, she went absolutely mad at me and said to me, "How dare you embarrass me in front of the doctors? How dare you tell the doctors that they're wrong? Who do you think you are?" And she then decided to like physically and verbally kind of really lash into me. And I can remember cowering and hiding my head and thinking to myself, I need to stay as small and quiet as I can to just survive. And that was my instant change in my attitude from that determined young girl that was going to learn to ride a bike. And defy everybody telling me I can't do stuff, to like being so scared to even hardly breathe. I did learn to ride my bike, and my dad did take me back to the hospital, and the doctors were amazed. But then I just spent the whole of my life being scared of what to do, because every time she shot me a look, I knew I was in trouble. And I basically ended up being her punch bag. Whenever she was angry or upset, I was the one who suffered with it. So you can imagine growing up hearing every day that I was ugly, useless, worthless, nobody would ever love me, and I would never amount to anything. My self-belief was very low. I had no self-esteem, no confidence whatsoever, and just thought, okay, well, I actually remember thinking to myself, I need to develop a really good personality, because I'm so ugly, nobody will ever want to look at me. But if I've got a nice personality, maybe people will like that about me. So that's where a lot of my humor comes in. I use humor a lot, and it's helped me throughout my childhood, get through my childhood. Then I left home at 16, got away as quick as I could, but I ended up in a relationship with a narcissist. And 3 months after we got married, he beat me up quite violently and picked me up and threw me against the wardrobe. And I ended up with actual concussion and whiplash because he threw me so hard. And I ended up living in a colleague's house with their 7-year-old, sharing a room with their 7-year-old daughter, because I had nowhere else to go because he'd isolated me from all of my friends. So you can imagine this, like, I think, oh my goodness, like maybe my mother's right. Nobody will ever love me, and I'll never amount to anything. I'm always messing things up. So I then realized that I just wanted to always have children, because I thought, well, I know how to be a good mum, because I'll just do the opposite of what my mother did. And I eventually got married and had 4 children. And then it really hit me that I needed to really work on my mindset, because I didn't want to repeat the same patterns that my mother had repeated with me, that her mother had done with her. So I went on this big journey of my mindset. But what I realized going along, I ended up having 2 boys, and then I got pregnant with my third child, and I bumped into a friend I hadn't seen for ages, and she said, "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize you was pregnant again. I bet you'd love to have a little girl this time." And it suddenly I went, "Oh my goodness, no," because I thought of having a little girl and having the same kind of relationship that I had with my mother and my mother had with my grandmother absolutely petrified me. So I was like, okay, I really need to keep working on my mindset. So I spent a lot of time working on my mindset. And I did actually go on to have 2 more children, both girls, which thankfully they're like 31 and 33 now, and they're my best friends. No, sorry, 31 and 32, they're my best friends now. So that was all good. But I realized that I was doing this, working so hard on my mindset, that it was like, okay, just keep pushing through and keep doing things. And I ended up getting to the stage where I could actually talk on stage. And in my mind, I knew I wanted to do it because I wanted to share my story, because I knew how powerful it was. But my body was going, "I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this." My heart was pounding. My palms were all sweaty. And I thought, there's something still not quite right here. And then I ended up finding out about trauma, and how trauma gets stored in the body, and how we need to work with our inner child, because our inner child is the one that's kind of like controlling how we feel about ourselves. And that our inner child is the one kind of holding us back, and why we have these bodily reactions. And once I discovered that and worked through that and released the emotions of the trauma from my body, it was like the key to the magic door, really. It's like, okay, now my mind and my body are actually in line with each other. I'm not conflicted and fighting myself, because that's how it felt. Like my mind wanted to do all these things, so I got the skills and the knowledge, but my body was going, no, because if we speak out, we're going to get into trouble, because my body was kind of still stuck in that trauma of being that young little girl that was always in trouble. So that's how I ended up becoming a trauma-informed coach, and working with people that have got beliefs that are holding them back, because it's a lot to do with how you hear things as a child. I mean, a lot of people thankfully don't have a childhood like I had, but sometimes even hearing things like, "Oh, children should be seen and not heard," and, you know, "Don't show off because nobody likes to show off." All those things can sometimes stick with people and affect them in their adulthood. And that's why I'm so passionate about what I do now, because sometimes it's like one sentence that can affect somebody for their whole of their life until they actually deal with it and process it.
Brooke, I'm really glad you brought up that line because that's something that my own family brought up a lot when I was growing up, is this idea that children are to be seen and not heard. And
Mm,
I didn't fully understand it until later in my life, how damaging that actually can be because you're essentially telling your children not to have a voice, not to have
yeah,
emotion, not to express themselves, not even how to express themselves. And not even, the worst part is not even being able to discover who they really might be, because
yeah,
there's a narrative being set up by their families to tell them who they should be or who they can be. And I think that's so far from the truth, based on your story you just shared with us, because I've caught on as you told your story that you have a mindset all the time of I can be different, I can do more, I'm capable of more. I don't have to be defined by this story created by my family.
absolutely, yeah. And it's realizing that none of us have to. Often when I first talk to a potential client and I say to them, you can do what you want to do. You can have whatever beliefs you like. And they'll often say, well, we've always done it this way in our family. People don't actually get curious about the beliefs that they have about themselves and where they've come from and if they actually help them or hold them back. But if you've got a belief that's absolutely helping you, great, carry on using that, expand on that. But if you've got a belief that's holding you back, even if your family have done it for years, it doesn't mean to say it's going to work for you in your generation, because what worked for your grandparents or your great grandparents may not work for you. And we often, things are passed down from generation to generation and never questioned. It's just okay, well, that's the way it's done in our family. So I'll just keep doing, even if it doesn't sit right with me.
That's another thing I've caught on to in my own coaching practice is this idea of, well, this is how we've always done it. And I'm a big
Yeah,
fan of sharing with people because this is common knowledge. Most people have heard this before, but they don't really understand it. Is that if you've always done what you've always done, you'll get what you've always got. And so if you don't
yeah.
ever try something new or question your beliefs, you will never find a different result. And different results mean that we challenge our beliefs. And I think that's something that many people struggle with on a very deep level, is being willing to just question their beliefs or question their convictions, because sometimes and more often than not, we've taken on those things from somebody else. They aren't even our beliefs. We just took them on and assumed control of it.
And I often get people come to me and say, well, it's always done this way, but I don't want to like say anything bad about my parents. And I will say that it's not about blaming parents or teachers or aunts and uncles or anybody that said things to you when you was a child. It's how you feel about them now and what you're doing about them. Because we can say something to a child and they will add up two and two and come up with five and see it very differently, but we don't always mean it that way. I've had so many clients come to me and say, I'm stupid, and I'm like, okay, that's an interesting statement. Where have you got that from? Well, I overheard my auntie say that my sister was a clever one, so I must be the stupid one. I will sort that. And when I say, well, how about having two clever children in the family? And they kind of look at me and think, oh, I've never thought of it that way. Because children up until the age of 7, which a lot of people may know, don't have that critical faculty to kind of like look at the grey areas and reason. It's very black and white. If somebody's stupid, somebody else must be clever. You know, so that's how children see it. And they don't understand that that then travels with them as they move along. And I remember having a client who had an issue about maths, because when she was at school, she was doing a maths sum on the board. And this was back in the early 70s again. And she got it wrong. And the teacher threw the board rubber at her and said to her, you're useless at maths. And from that age of 7 until she was in her 50s, she believed that she was no good at maths because that's what the teacher said. And she didn't question it. But actually, she was very, very clever, but she needed to have maths qualification to get this promotion. So she called me in and we did some coaching work. She had to do a maths and an English, actually. And I said, do you want some help with your English? She went, no, no, I'm good with my English. So we did some work with her maths, and she realized actually it was just this one sentence that had her stuck for years about maths and numbers. And she rang me up after her exam and she said, you're not going to believe this. I said, what's that? She said, I passed my maths, they're great. She said, but I should have took you up on your offer of English. She said, because I failed that, so I need to resit that. But we actually changed her beliefs about her and how she was, because she was a very clever lady. She could do maths, but she thought she couldn't because of what this maths teacher had said to her back when she was 7.
That's what I find so powerful about what you said is we learn all these things from a very young age. And I think the other thing that we don't ever think about is when we are, in that range of 7 years old, even through part of our teenage years, we don't have enough experience and enough variety of knowledge of the world at that point. And so we lean more on our parents, we lean more on our teachers, we lean more on those around us to guide us and tell us what we need to hear or should hear. And most of the time, we don't ever learn to reach that place to question those things, like you just said. When she said she failed English, I wish I took you up on that. That's a big recollection of reflection. That's a good place that somebody's now starting to question that belief of, I actually wasn't okay. I did need some help with this. And I think
Yeah.
that that little thing, as small as that was, that's actually a very huge part of dismantling those belief systems that are not supporting you.
Yeah. And when we can work on them and realize, okay, this is how I see it. I also, have had clients that have had issues with money because of how they've grown up hearing things about money. Money doesn't grow on trees. Who do you think I am? Like, because I'm in England, parents said, I'm not the Bank of England, oh, we can't afford that, I'm not Rockefeller, all these kind of things. So you grow up having this idea about money, and that often, oh well, if you see somebody that's got a nice car or something, oh well, he must be doing something dodgy, or she must be doing something dodgy to have money like that to buy that sort of car. So we have this kind of idea as children that, okay, if you're rich, you must be bad. So then people have this block about earning money. But actually, when you think about how much good people can actually do if they had the money that they wanted to earn as well, but they don't think about that because all they've heard growing up is like all the things that the beliefs that they've heard from their parents, who've heard it from their parents and their grandparents. So it's really recognizing where these beliefs have actually come from, like you said, because they all are inherited. And when I say to my clients, okay, that's not actually your belief, what would you like to do with it? Do you want to give it back to the person who gave it to you? And they're like, I never thought about that. Like, well, you can create whatever belief you want. The great thing about beliefs is we are taught them, and they like a behavior. So if we've taught them, we can actually unlearn them and create ones of our own that do actually work for us.
And I think that's a beautiful. You're reminding me of a book I read by Greg McCowan called Effortless, and he talked a lot about how people go through their days all the time. They say, "Oh, I have to do this, I have to do that, this and this and this and this," and they create these monster lists of things to do during the day, and they never actually accomplish all of them. And he talks about in the book this big question of what if it was effortless? And you're reminding me of the way you're talking about beliefs. What if you understood those were taught to you? They weren't actually yours, but they were taught to you. They were put on you, and you took them
Yeah.
on subconsciously. And what if you learned, by the way, what if you could unlearn beliefs? What if you could teach yourself new beliefs that were more empowering, more uplifting, more aligned with who you are? And I think that's such a deep place to go, but a lot of people have that fear around letting go of those beliefs because it's comfortable. And I have come across this in my grief coaching a lot with people that it's very comfortable to manage the chaos that we live in currently than to go into the unknown and create that new thing. And it's this level of uncertainty and I don't know if this is going to work out or not. I can manage this thing over here really, really well, but this thing I just not sure how to get around.
And it's also the attachment to the belief, because if they got the belief from their parents, who they, are kind, loving parents, to go against that belief, they feel that they're going against their parents or their grandparents. But when I start to explain that, okay, well, it's worked for your parents who are different people to you, it doesn't mean to say you love your parents or your grandparents any less. It's just you need to work out what works for you right now in this time. Because if you've got parents like and grandparents like me that were brought up like in the early like 40s and things, what they believed and what worked for them is a completely different way of life to what would work for me now and what I can believe in. So it's really understanding that it's not anything to say we're going to like disregard anything anybody else believes. It's okay for anybody else to believe what they want to believe, but when it's affecting us and stopping us doing the things that we want to do, then it's like time to get curious and think, okay, how can I do this differently? How can I look at it in a different way and have a different perspective from it?
Well, I wanted to ask you, what was a pivotal moment? Because I know you grew up with a narcissistic mother and you went through a lot of verbal, emotional abuse with that. What was one of the most pivotal moments that you started changing those beliefs or that you became more aware of them and made that choice to change them?
It was when I decided I wanted to have children. I thought I don't want to have these kind of beliefs about myself and pass them on to my children. I wanted to have the belief that actually I can achieve the things I want to achieve, that I am worthy, that I am lovable. So I could then teach my children to have beliefs that would help them and that they could choose their own beliefs as well. Of course, I've passed on my beliefs to my children, but I've also said, if you want to change your beliefs about anything, feel free to go and do that. But I just didn't want to pass on that trauma to the next generation and to generations after that. So it was really, really important for me to work on me so I didn't do that.
Well, I think that's very powerful for you to get to that place. And I know that having children shapes our perspective in a lot of ways.
Mm,
Because when we realize we're bringing life into the world, we start reflecting back on our childhood, how we grew up, what kind of beliefs we had, how we were treated as children. And I know when I was expecting my son into the world, I had that same conflict go through my head where I said, I'm not going to do certain things the way I was raised. I'm not going to. I want to give my child a whole different experience because I know I'm aware of my problems. I'm aware of things that set me back or held me back, challenges I've
mm,
faced. And if I can give a child a different outcome in the world by recognizing and understanding those patterns, that's going to set them up more for success in their life, maybe sooner. And I also may instill better beliefs in them that are more empowering and supportive for them rather than, like you brought up with your mom saying, I wish you would just be a normal kid. I think it's such a powerful gift when we bring life into the world to shed those parts of ourselves that weren't serving and also aren't going to serve that life and give them what we didn't have.
yeah, and even now it's so wonderful because I'm lucky at the stage that I've got grandchildren and seeing how my children are with my grandchildren and the difference that they have. Because if I hadn't have worked on myself, I think my children would be different and they would have brought their children up differently. But my grandchildren don't have any of that trauma or remnants of it because I made sure I cleared it out of me. So I didn't pass it on to my children. Yeah, there are times when, as I was a young mum, that I probably did things, and we've had conversations about it, me and my children, because obviously when I went on my healing journey, it's like, oh my goodness, have I really traumatized my children? Because I'm a human being. I used to get angry, I used to get upset, especially being a single mum. But the interesting part was my children said, yeah, you used to get angry and you used to get upset, but you always used to, if you thought you were angry and it wasn't our fault, you would always say to us, I'm really sorry, mummy's tired, or whatever. We always knew that you loved me. And that was the difference. My mother used to get angry at me and blame me for something. And I would never get anything back like, okay, well, I'm really sorry, because it was my fault as far as she was concerned. I understand now because I understand how narcissists work, and she's not capable of doing that. But my children still understood that I loved them, that I saw them and I heard them and I valued them as people. Whereas I never ever had that, and I've still never had that even now. If I probably saw my mother now, she would still never apologize for anything that happened to me because, as far as she was concerned, it was all my fault and not hers. So it's that different because I don't want people to think, oh my goodness, I've got children and I've shouted or whatever. Because the one thing we can guarantee with parenthood is you're going to mess it up because they don't come with a manual. But it's understanding that sometimes we say things, especially, same as like when we're with a partner, we'll sometimes say or do things when we're tired or angry, but afterwards we reflect and say, I'm really sorry that, I shouldn't have said that. It wasn't your fault, it was how I was feeling at the time. It's the same with children. Even just because they're little doesn't mean to say that they don't have those feelings and they still want to be seen and heard and validated in life as well.
You brought up something I've questioned in my own life, and I read recently in a new book I'm reading from David Goggins, his second book. It's this concept that you brought up that your mom wasn't capable of apologizing, and I've been around narcissists to know they're just not capable of that. how do you walk people through a situation in life where they may be expecting an apology or want an apology, and it becomes a roadblock or limiting belief for them to move forward from that relationship or that situation?
I do a lot of what I call inner child reprogramming with my clients. So it's they're basically going to reparent themselves and give their inner child all the stuff that they didn't get from their parent. And if, especially if they've got a narcissistic parent, I say to them, quite openly, they won't apologize, because if they apologize, they would then have to look into themselves and reflect back. And it's far too painful for a narcissist to do that, because they are more insecure than anybody else, any other human beings, because that's the way they do. Why they do the things they do is to try and soothe their inner child, because they've got such deep wounds. So they're not capable of saying I'm sorry, because if they say I'm sorry, they would have to look inwards as to why they're sorry. Occasionally a narcissist will say they're sorry to get something else, to carry on the manipulation, but it won't be a very sincere apology for like things that have actually happened in life. So it's just understanding that you're going to have to deal with the fact that they just won't do it, because, and that's their issue, it's not our issue. And it's dealing with how we feel about that and accepting that, and helping our inner child to heal our own inner child wounds, to realize that we are good enough and we are worthy without that apology.
See, I think that's something that we all, a reason I come up on that apology situation is that I've run across people, including myself, that have struggled with that. And I think it's
Mm,
because we have a childhood place that we were not seen, heard, or understood at some point for whatever situation that may have come. And we always are looking for that apology for some kind of closure or some kind of
yeah,
reassurance of ourselves. And I think that it's very hard to move forward from that place in a lot of ways unless we have somebody come along like a coach like you or I to come in and show that outside perspective. That we don't necessarily always need the apology, but we have to look for that within ourselves because that's where we can find it. And I love that you did share, by the way, that narcissists are just not capable of apologizing because it means they've got to look within. And that's what I've noticed about people with those traits or even full out narcissists is that they're very broken, very damaged people inside. And if they have to look inwards, I mean, it's a very painful thing for them. Whereas the example you gave that I thought was very beautiful was that you talked about there were times you got upset or frustrated as a single mom. And I don't blame you for raising four kids on your own. That's a lot. But what I think is so beautiful about that is unlike your mom and your experience you went through, you acknowledge those moments of yourself being in that state and then apologizing to your children or just acknowledging with them. And you got that different response that you never got growing up. And
yeah.
what did that feel like for you? Was that a moment where you kind of like looked back at where you grew up in and your environment and went, wow, I just pulled off the opposite, or I just showed my children the one thing I wanted growing up?
Yeah, and I think with narcissists, because then they're not capable of apologizing like that. I realized, I mean, I didn't understand my mother was a narcissist until I was in my late 30s. So that was kind of like putting the whole kind of jigsaw puzzle together. It was like, oh my goodness, that's why she doesn't do this. But I knew when I decided to be a mother that if I ever did get angry or did shout, because I understood that, people do that, that I would say I was sorry and apologize, because I wanted my children to be seen and heard and be validated as a human being, which I never was from my mother. I mean, fortunately, I had a wonderful dad, granddad, and auntie that taught me that actually adults aren't all like my mother. So it's really understanding that how we feel inside, and how we, like you said, you yourself said, there's some things that we never want to do that our parents did, that with our children, because we don't want to bring them up in that way, because we know what it felt like. But I will say to my clients, if you're really struggling with having a parent who's a narcissist that isn't going to apologize, but you have to think about a narcissist. They are like a little 2-year-old toddler in an adult's body. I said, would you ever expect to get an apology from a 2-year-old toddler who's had a temper tantrum? And they go, well, no, because they're not capable of it. And I said, that's exactly the same thing. A narcissist is like a 2-year-old toddler, but in an adult body. So they're still not capable of saying, I'm sorry, because that's been responsible for your actions, and they just won't be responsible for their actions. They're not capable of it because they are too hurt, and the wounds are too deep for them to acknowledge them.
I couldn't agree more with you on what you just said because I think it takes a insurmountable amount of courage and it takes some amount of being able to reflect and look within to really see those areas of where you've got trauma or where you've had problems come up in life. It takes a lot to blame yourself, is what I call it, just because I've done a lot of Tony Robbins coaching and I watched something very powerful from him one time where he said it's always easy to blame other people for anything and everything that goes on. That is extremely easy to do. But what's even harder is actually to go within yourself and blame yourself
Mm.
for things. And I think that's a big place where, especially when you end up dealing with narcissists, for example, I went through this about a year ago and it was a very hard time for me in a coaching call, but I started blaming myself effectively. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but a positive way of saying, this is what I tolerated. This is what I allowed. This is what I participated in. This is what I experienced. And when I got to that place of saying those were all choices and actions I made, and had I made those differently in certain areas, I may have given myself a different outcome. It didn't feel so heavy anymore, and it didn't feel negative anymore. It felt very empowering and it felt very positive, and it felt very much in this place of I'm now no longer at circumstance of my cause, but I am now in a place of control of myself and my actions and what I want and what I don't want and what I'll tolerate and what I'll allow. And I think that helping people get to that place, going through trauma, going through narcissistic abuse, it's just such an empowering place to see that shift occur in people, because it's a place where we redefine ourselves, we redefine our self-worth, and we ultimately can create a beautiful life, as you've done in the later part of your story.
Yeah, because growing up with somebody who's a narcissist or got lots of narcissistic traits, they like to be in control, and they don't see their children as an actual person. They just see them as a miniature them that they can mold how they want to. And it's understanding that we're conditioned to be people pleasers. So then when we decide to start doing that inner work and working on ourselves, it's like, okay, I need to start having boundaries. Well, I can't have boundaries because that's selfish, because growing up, we were never allowed to have any boundaries because we were classed as selfish if we had boundaries. So it's quite a few layers of things to work through to actually start working on those belief systems. And for years, friends of mine said, I think you should have some therapy to help you sort that stuff out. I'm like, no, no, I'm surviving. I'm fine. I don't want to open that box. And it only got to the stage where I thought, well, I'm done with survival. I really want to thrive. And when I started having therapy, because I never cried much either, because I wasn't allowed to cry as a child, because I was told, if I start crying, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry for. So I was too scared to cry. And it was like when I started having therapy, it was like a tsunami of tears. It was it wasn't a pretty sight. It was like a snot fest and a tsunami. I thought I was never going to stop crying. And I cried for a whole complete session with my therapist. And afterwards, I was completely drained. But once I actually recovered from that, like you said, I felt a lot lighter. I felt more in control. I felt more powerful because I'd let out so much emotion that I'd been suppressing for years. Because emotions are supposed to be expressed, not suppressed. But when you're living with somebody like that, you just push down your emotions, however you're feeling, because you're too scared to show them, either whether that's sadness or happiness. Because if you're too happy, a narcissist won't like that. Like, why are you so happy? I'm the one that's supposed to be the happy one. I'm the center of attention, not you. So we have to be very, very careful of how we use our emotions. When you got very, very good at pressing down our emotions and not showing how we're feeling.
I'm really glad you brought that up because emotions are something I've been working on a lot over the last 7 years, and I've learned, to your point, especially when I was around narcissistic people. I had an in-law that was a narcissist, and you're right. You end up suppressing your emotions down. You start to feel like you're not important, and you feel like you don't have a place to have emotions or express yourself. It's all about that person.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did learn about emotions, especially anger is the one I love to talk about because people have that one all the time. Emotions are messengers. They're trying
Yeah.
to communicate something to us. And when we try to suppress them or ignore them or push them out of the way, they will come back louder, funny story, and they will either come back in the sense of, physical pain in your body or an ailment or feeling off in some way. They'll come back that way, or it can even be an inappropriate response to something that didn't warrant that level of anger, for example. And so, I've been trying to share with people that emotions are messengers and you got to listen to them. And the biggest thing you can do really is ask yourself, what's causing me to feel this way right now? Or what's this emotion trying to tell me? What's this situation making me feel like right now? Or what's it trying to express to me? And I think that's a beautiful story you just shared about crying the whole session in a therapy session. I think that's a beautiful moment, by the way. I love that you were able to be vulnerable and open enough in that moment because that was probably years, if not decades, of repressed
Yes,
emotion
it
finally come
wasn't
to
a
the
pretty sight.
surface. I bet it felt like a massive release for you to just finally
It did,
be
yes.
be Brooke.
Absolutely. And that's how I work with my clients because, like you said, you say messages, but I say feedback. When we have emotions come up, like whether it's procrastination, sadness, anxiety, depression, happiness, it's our body telling us, and it's our inner child. So if we're going to do something, we know mentally, logically, we've got the skills and knowledge to do it, but suddenly we stop and we procrastinate. We're not the procrastinator. It's a part of us that's showing up to protect our inner child who doesn't feel good enough, worthy, lovable, or important to do what we want to do. So I was liken the inner child to a puppet master. When the inner child feels confident and happy, they'll happily let us play and do whatever we want to do. Like, the puppeteer's got the strings going. But the minute you want to do something that our inner child doesn't feel good enough or worthy to do, they will pull back those strings and stop.
Ooh.
I need some reassurance here. So when we look at things, like you said, people often push the their their emotions away. They're a bit like a little 5-year-old child. If you've ever had a 5-year-old child trying to get your attention and you're not taking in notice, they will just get louder and louder and louder until you actually accept them and listen to what they've got to say. So I always encourage my clients to actually welcome in those emotions and get curious, like you said, as to why they've shown up. Where's the story behind those emotions showing up? What's your inner child trying to tell you right now?
I think that's a beautiful perspective, and I haven't heard that yet from anybody, so I appreciate you sharing that. But you're right, there is a story behind those emotions, and it's always there. It's always in the background, and that's where, coming back to how we were talking about beliefs, taking on beliefs from other people. That story is the same thing as well. It sits back there in the silence, and we may be running that on autopilot in many ways, and it's not until we give ourselves the space or the time. And I love that you brought up therapy. I think therapy is a great place to do that because you're in a safe
Yeah.
place away from everything where you can actually allow that story to come up and you can allow yourself to see that story in a safe place and learn why it causes you to react a certain way or feel a certain way. Um, Brooke, I wanted to ask you about the rest of your story there. I know you went through a couple of very abusive relationships, and now you're happily married. I'm assuming by taking camper van trips, which sounds exciting
Yeah.
to me because I love that. What was it like for you? I mean, you went through a narcissistic relationship with your mom for a good majority of life, and then you went into abusive relationships after that, and then you found your husband. What was it like going through those transitions? And did that feel like did you take those abusive relationships as repeating a pattern or repeating an experience in life? And did that cause you to reflect or make changes in certain ways, or did it raise things to the surface that you might not have seen earlier on?
Yeah, it was like, okay, the common thread here seems to be me. So if I don't change and do something different, like we said earlier, I'm still going to keep getting the same things as I've always got. So I'm the only one who's capable of changing me. I can't change anybody else around me. That's their responsibilities, but I can change how I look at things and how I feel. So changing how I look at things and how I feel, and having my boundaries, and like you said, deciding what I was going to tolerate and what I wasn't going to tolerate, I then attracted different people into my life. When I started being more boundaried, I was known as a person. I'll go ask Brooke, she always says yes, because I was a big people pleaser, because I was scared that if I said no to people, I wouldn't have any friends. And that belief I had from a childhood that nobody would ever love me would keep going. So I needed to make sure people still loved me, and that was my way of dealing with it. But as soon as I started putting boundaries in place, my true friends were like, yes, I'm glad you're doing that. Everybody else started kicking off who was benefiting from me not having boundaries. And I lost a lot of so-called friends who weren't really my friends. They were just using me because I had no boundaries. And I started like associating with different people because I was attracting different people because I was a different person. And then along the way, I met my husband, and life is a whole lot different. And I'm not the same person as I am when I was in my first relationship, because I won't tolerate anything that I did in my first relationship, and I have my boundaries, and I will say this is what I will tolerate, and this is what I definitely won't tolerate.
So how does it feel? Because you've had quite the journey as you've shared with us on today's podcast episode. How does it feel when you look back on your journey and where you came from to who you are today? I mean, that's got to feel so empowering. I mean, in many ways, that was a very, very hard journey with lots of very difficult challenges, but you become such a just empowered person in your life. And I see the confidence, I see the real person coming through, and I see this level of happiness and gratitude come through for you. Well, what's it feel like to be where you're at today?
Well, it's quite interesting because just going back a bit, when I was 7, I can remember going outside and looking up at the sky, not particularly talking to anybody because I've never been particularly religious, but saying, if anybody's listening, can you just let me know what my purpose is in life? Because I must be with this woman for some reason. Because I think in my little 7-year-old head, that was the only way I could deal with it. There must be a reason that I was put with this woman. So I thought I just had a purpose in life. And later on, I've come to realize, I think it was because I could cope with it and learn from it and help others who couldn't, and be a voice, because there's not many people that I know of that will speak as openly about their childhood, and especially about their mother if they've had a narcissistic mother, as I do. But the more I talk about it and come on podcasts like with yourself, the more I get people say to me, oh my goodness, it's like you're talking about my life. I thought I was the only one. So to me, the more I share my story, the more I'm letting people know that they're not the only one. Because the thing with living with a narcissistic parent growing up, everything had to be hush hush. What went on behind closed doors stayed behind closed doors. So we learned not to speak about it. But I've come to the conclusion that somebody needs to speak about it. And at the moment, that's me.
Well, I think you've had it's a beautiful story, a brutal story is what I'm gonna call it. One of my podcast guests came up with this concept of something being both brutal and beautiful at the same time. And I think that
Yeah.
that's very representative of your story. And I'm just very inspired by the path you've taken. And like I said, I know it has not been easy at all, but to see who you become through all those things, despite the circumstances, despite the abuse, to come out and be the beautiful person that you are today and helping women reclaim their power, I think is just a true testament that we can go through these traumas in life and these losses and find deep purpose and meaning through those, and to find our gifts, as I like to call it, our gifts and our blessings through that, and ultimately create a beautiful life from that. Um, Brooke,
Yeah. And I wake up every day grateful that I can wake up every day, and that I wake up not feeling stressed and not feeling anxious and worried about what I have to say and what I have to do, and that I can actually do the work that I'm doing. And I'm very grateful for
well, that leads me to my next question for you. When did you make the choice to get into coaching?
that. I didn't actually, coaching kind of chose me. It was purely by accident. I had some friends saying to me, you should really, start doing this coaching as a business because you've helped us all so much. And then another friend said to me, oh, I'm going on this free coaching weekend to get like this little diploma thing, but I don't want to go on my own. And I know you love to learn. Will you come with me? And I'm like, yeah, sure. That sounds interesting. So I went along. And as they were all talking, I thought, I already do that. I already do that. I already do that. And as the weekend went along, I thought there's something in this coaching lot. So I then signed up to do my full coaching qualification, and the rest they say is kind of history, and it all went from there. So I think I was guided in some way to go to that weekend to kind of shine the light on the fact that that was where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to do.
Well, I can tell from today's call that you have an extensive knowledge and a great ability to connect with people and understand them where they're at. And I think that's a very big skill I don't see in all coaches, but I do say there's certain people that have had that life experience like you've had that are able to get to reach people in those places where they're at. And that's where I think that's a beautiful thing about being a great coach is being able to meet people where they are and holding space for them under you may not fully understand where they're at because we all have different walks of life, but we're
Mm,
able to hold space and make them feel seen and heard and understood. And I think that really comes from people like you and I that have gone through trauma in very deep ways because we never got that. We never knew what that looked like. But once we did and we discovered it, as you said a few minutes ago, we're able to show people who don't know what that is or what it looks like or how helpful that can be. We're able to give them that gift.
absolutely. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to give other people that gift.
So, Brooke, I also want to ask you before we wrap up the podcast. You mentioned that you're an author. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, that was an interesting one. I'm very aware of myself now, and I love to challenge myself. So I actually challenged myself to write and publish a book in 90 days. And it's my journey of how I overcame the self-sabotage cycle because I was always self-sabotaging myself. So it's 12 chapters that you can go through to work through self-sabotage, and they have exercises at the end of each chapter. But if you've got a specific thing that you need to work on, you can do a standalone chapter. Like there's a chapter on forgiveness. Now, a lot of people struggle, and I'm not talking about forgiving other people, it's actually forgiving yourself for all the things that you've done because of how you felt about yourself. And it's a big piece of work a lot of people struggle to do. So you can actually do the standalone chapters as well. And it's called, I've got a copy here, you can have it, How to Break Through the Self-Sabotage Cycle. And it's available on Amazon. So feel free to check that out if you want to.
Well, I'll definitely put some show notes in the comments there for people to look up that book. I plan on buying a copy myself because I'm very intrigued to read that. And I love that you brought up forgiveness as an example. I've told people a lot that we've misused forgiveness in a lot of ways throughout our life, and I think that starting with forgiveness really should start with yourself
Yeah.
because you will find forgiveness there when you start within before you go out with it. Um, well, Brooke, I just want to say this has been an honor to have you on the Empower Grief Journey podcast. This has been a very, very powerful episode. And I just want to say that I very much appreciate you being so open and vulnerable with your story and also sharing what you've learned along the way. You've definitely learned some very valuable, very deep lessons along your journey. And I can tell that you're out there making a bigger impact than you probably know at this point.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
And as I wrap up the podcast, I usually ask my guests a couple questions. If you were to run into somebody who's going through grief or maybe feels stuck in grief, what's one thing that you would share with them that could help them navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
Well, I actually went through a grief process. Even though my mother's still alive, I grieved the mother I wish I could have had. And it's just allowing whatever feelings are coming up, allow them feelings to come up. Because often when we're grieving, we think, well, we can't feel like that. We can't be sad because we don't want to bring other people down. If you feel sad and you want to cry, it's okay because that's your way of processing it. And if you don't feel sad and if you don't want to cry, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's just that you're not ready to deal with the grief in the way other people are. Everybody's got a different way of dealing with it. I've known people that have had grief that suddenly went mad on cleaning their house. They didn't cry, but they just cleaned their house. But that was their way of dealing with the grief. So, however you feel, it's okay.
I love that advice. That's what I share all the time is just that you need to find the way of grieving that works best for you. And I'm glad you gave that example because for some people, cleaning the house or cleaning a car, cleaning something really can be a helpful way to move through those emotions and give yourself time to process them in a great way.
Yeah,
And I also love that you said cry. I love that because,
yeah,
I grew up around people that were always saying men shouldn't cry and whatnot. And I think that crying is a very big release of emotion and big release of feelings within you and allowing yourself to move through your emotions at the pace that's comfortable for you. So I always encourage people, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign you're human.
yeah.
It's a sign you feel and it's a sign you have emotion. So don't be shy about it.
And it will come in waves. You'll feel some days you'll feel happy, and other days you won't. I mean, I lost my dad in September 21, and this June on Father's Day in England, it it hit me in a big wave again. And I thought, oh my goodness, I thought, it's been like 4 years, but I still really missed him. And it was not being able to like speak to him on Father's Day and go take him a present, take him a card and see how he was. It was like, you think some people think, well, it's been 4 years, you should be able to get over it by now. But I don't think we ever do get over having a person that's passed away because we always miss that person, especially on special occasions and that. So it's okay, even if it's a few years down the road, to still feel those up and down emotions about it.
I couldn't agree with you more about that. Grief tends to come in waves, and there's always days that you're gonna feel okay. You're gonna feel like the world goes on, and normal's not the word I love to use, but I just say you're
Yeah.
gonna feel normal in a sense. There's days you're gonna not feel that way. You're gonna feel like a 1,000 pound boulder sitting on you.
And
Um,
not to feel guilty when you do feel happy and have a good day. It's okay to also have a good day and be happy. And you don't have to feel guilty about that because the person that's passed away wouldn't want you to be sad all the rest of your life. And they're probably, depends on your beliefs, are smiling down and you're thinking, oh, I'm glad they're having a good day and that they are happy and enjoying life.
I couldn't agree more with that because I don't think our loved ones that pass on want us to be sad all the time. I think they want us to live our life and
Yeah.
Uh, I remember my grandfather saying that before he passed away in 20. He said, I want you to go live your life. I lived mine. I lived a very long life. I want you to go live your life and have experiences. So I think that that's sage advice. So, Brooke, if people listen to this podcast and they want to connect with you, where can they find you?
They can either email me at brooke@brookebownes.com. And if anybody's had sort of like things come up and they want to have a chat with me, I do offer a complimentary call with me. So if they want to email me, I can arrange that for them. Or I hang out a lot on LinkedIn or on Facebook as well. So you can connect with me on either of those platforms as well.
Well, for listeners listening to this podcast, I want you guys to know go in the show notes because I'll have all of Brooke's email, her websites, and her social media there for you guys to connect with her. I definitely recommend checking out her book. It's a very intriguing topic over self-sabotage and how to move through those with the exercises that she talked about a little bit earlier today in the podcast. And other than that, Brooke, I just want to say again, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
And I want to thank our listeners for joining Brooke and I today on this episode of the Empowered Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone you know who could benefit from Brooke's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.